is, as you know, the beginning of the Passion Week. This is Palm Sunday. What's Palm Sunday? It's the triumphant entry of Jesus into Jerusalem. As he was coming into town, they were waving palm branches, and they were laying them out in his path. And so this is the triumphant entry, and that's the reason I call it Palm Sunday. So this is going into the week that will culminate in the next week of Easter, which is the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So we know that as we go through the week, on Friday, his crucifixion. And I wanted to focus on this morning, because as I was thinking about this, that Jesus, his last week, what we've been doing with the Sermon on the Mount, we've been focusing on the Beatitudes. And the Beatitudes to me was a focus of this was Jesus' first message, his first teaching of his people. And so I thought it was important, and I thought maybe at the beginning of the year was a good time to start something like this, that if Jesus is going to start teaching, if this is the first thing he's going to say, I would think that would be pretty important. All of Jesus' words are important, for sure. But the very first time he has a chance to teach, what is it that he's going to say? And the Beatitudes are that. And so it was a good study to go through. And so this morning, as we're coming into Easter, that same kind of concept was in my head. And so basically, it's the idea of what is the last thing that Jesus would say and teach. And this is going to be the last time that he's going to be with his disciples, at least before the crucifixion. They certainly have some moments and times that he will see them sporadically after his resurrection, before the ascension to heaven. But this is really one of the last moments he has to teach his disciples, to be with them and to teach them. It's going to be this evening that he goes into the garden. It's going to be this evening that he will be betrayed and arrested, and the events begin to take place that will lead to his crucifixion. So these are, in a sense, his last message, his last teaching, his last lesson to his disciples. And so I thought, well, how fitting that would be to, after we've been working on the Beatitudes, his first words, to what would be some of his last words and one of his last lessons for his disciples. Now, this is the week of the Passover. Many of you would know that and recognize that, remember that. That the Feast of the Passover is, as it says at verse 1, it is a commemoration of what God had done for them in the story of Moses and Israel and being brought out of slavery from Egypt. We know all that they had the 10 plagues, and this is a commemoration of and a feast of the Passover of the last and the 10th plague, the one in which they were finally set free. A show of the power of God, and that he came and he brought the plague was the death angel would come over the place of Egypt. And this was one of the few plagues that was possible to be shared by the nation of Israel. The people of Israel were spared many of the plagues. That only happened to only the Egyptian people and not to the Israelites, or most of them. But this is one that was possible for all. But they were given instructions on how to go about that evening's activities and how to eat a meal properly, and then to do what? To paint the blood on the doorpost of their home. And if they did that, then the death angel would pass over their house and spare them the 10th plague, which is the loss of the firstborn of people and of animal. The firstborn would be killed. And so this is a show of commemoration of that sparing of them by God's power, and also their release from bondage. So this is something they've celebrated every year. Now, I don't know that it was never predicted, but I think it's one of those things of God that you're never able to understand the mind of God. But once something has happened, it becomes so clear and so obvious and so perfect as God is, that he would choose the week of Passover to be the week of the sacrifice of his son. The fulfillment of the promise of the Messiah not only to come, but to live and then to be that perfect sacrifice for all of us. Because as the picture of the 10th plague of the death angel the death of the firstborn, being saved by the blood. All of those are pictures that we see at the crucifixion with Jesus Christ at the cross. So we see all of that played out here during the Easter time. So his last act, his last message that he leaves with them is this. And I just read those few verses that was more specific. We'll kind of jump around in this chapter just a little bit. But in verse 1 it does say, now that before the feast of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart this world. So he knew he was leaving. He knew his time was short. Verse 3 says, as we read, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hand, and that he had come from God and was going back to God. So again, he knew his time was short. And so with that knowledge, this is what he wanted to do with his disciples. This is what he wanted to teach them. This is what he wanted to leave them with as his last message, so to speak. And of all the messages and all the teachings that he had given his disciples, this was it. And what was it? It was the message to serve others. That's the last lesson, last message, the last teaching that Jesus gives his disciples before the crucifixion. I understand this is a group of men who, by nature of the society they grew up in, but we've seen that exemplified even throughout their time with Jesus, that they are a group of men who've worried about and thought about what their status was. They often talked about who was the closest to Jesus, who would get the better place in heaven, who would rank higher, who got a better place at the table. I mean, these people were often worried about and considering status and ranking. But it was common in their society to think in those terms. And so they thought of that even within themselves, within their group, within the disciples under Jesus. And so something like washing feet, as we read in our verses, and Jesus washed the disciples' feet. Even for washing feet, that was for the lowest of all servants. That was something that the lowest ranking servant did. Now, I know some of you kind of have have heard these stories enough and kind of have a little bit of a picture, but I want to give you a picture of what this looks like. Their table was like about this high off the ground, basically. And they reclined at the table. Often you read that in a lot of your versions, it says they reclined at the table. And they literally mean that, not in like our kind of recliner where we go back. You get your recliner and you hit the little lever and you go back and you feel all comfortable. Their reclining was in a prone position, but it was a forward position. And as you were at this little short table, a lot of times you had pillows, but you were on your left elbow. And you were at the table, and you would reach over with your right hand, and you'd grab the food off the plate, and you would eat, and you would talk to the other people at the table. Sometimes it would be, you would be, relatively close to each other. In other words, you didn't necessarily have enough room to go, this elbow's getting tired. I'm just going to roll over to my other elbow and start eating with my left hand. You usually don't even have that much room to do that. You're so close to the other person that they're just right there in front of you, or right there next to you. If that person behind you is talking, you're just kind of looking like this at them. You're just right there. Okay, you're close to each other. So as you're on your elbow and your head is at the table and you're reaching and grabbing the food off your plate, your feet are extended away from the table. And so what would happen in a place of great hospitality and a way of taking care of your guests is you might have someone come and wash their feet while they're reclining at the table. In our world, this almost be like pampering. This is not just hospitality. This is pampering. This is doing some things that would be really great and wonderful and feel this is high class type stuff. Hospitality was very high on their list, as we know. So this was something that they would have their feet extended away, and someone would come wash their feet. And although they enjoyed it, although it felt good, and it was very much appreciated, the people who are there, the guests, are going to continue their conversation. They're going to continue talking with the people at the table. And the person who's doing the washing of the feet are almost invisible. They are given almost no attention or acknowledgement. Even though it was something that was enjoyed and appreciated from a hospitality standpoint. they were basically ignored. It was the lowest of low tasks. The feet was considered the worst because it really was. And they didn't bathe all the time, but when they had opportunity to bathe, they would be all clean. Then they put on their sandals and walk down to the market, and their feet are all dirty again. Okay? So their feet are constantly dirty. It is the dirtiest part, the most constant dirty part of their body. So it was the most unclean. So nobody wanted that job. Nobody appreciated that job. It was the lowest of the low. So the worst ranking servant, the lowest ranking servant, is the one that got that task. And it was very unappreciated, got very little attention, almost ignored, almost invisible. That's the scene here as Jesus gets up and he puts a towel around his waist and he goes and washes the feet of the disciples reclining at the table. And again, as these men grew up in a society very conscious of status, very conscious about ranking and where they ranked, and the symbols of things of honor and symbols of things of dishonor. And so they are here experiencing the fact that their master, their teacher, the one that they knew and acknowledged as the Son of God, the Messiah, was now washing their feet. And that's the reason why in verse 6, that Peter speaks up. So he came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, do not wash my feet." He was speaking for the uncomfortable situation that they all were feeling. I mean, a master doesn't wash feet. I mean, if anything, it would be all of them washing the feet of Jesus. That's the way it ought to work. But for the master, and certainly the Messiah, the Son of God, to be washing their feet is extremely uncomfortable and very personal. And so when he came to Peter who often, he doesn't have any problems running his mouth anyway, so he had no hesitation to speak up, where the others were very uncomfortable even to speak up about it. He spoke up and said what they were thinking. "Lord, do not wash my feet." And that's the reason why he said that, because it was uncomfortable. Jesus, the Son of God, should not be washing me, a sinner's, dirty feet. So his message, as Jesus is teaching and exemplifies by this action of washing feet, is consistent with what he has taught throughout his entire ministry. And what we've summed up often in two things: that we love God and we love others. And in this case, as he is showing how to love others. And so he leaves the task. He is showing them and leaving them the task to love and to be loving of others. And he puts that into their hands as he knows he will depart from them shortly. He'll be crucified. He'll be put in a grave. And though he will arise from the grave, he will still only be with them periodically, and even then for a short time. So that example that he leaves it, that at every level, in every way, we are to live for and to serve your fellow man. That we are to live for and to serve our fellow man in every possible way. What things could be left out? What could you say, well, we won't go that far to serve our fellow man? If the Master, the Messiah, the Prince of all creation, gets on his knees and washes feet, what else is there that is below that? If he would do that, then there's nothing else below that. If he would do the most menial of tasks, there's nothing then he would say to us, or that we could say, that's too low for me to do. I'm supposed to serve others, yes. I'm supposed to love others, yes. Put others before myself, yes. But I'm not going that far. I'm not going to do that much. Jesus, in his example and his teaching, these last message that he is giving to his disciples is saying, there's no place that is too far in serving mankind. If I can do this, and I do this and show this to you, I put this into your hand. Now last week, as we got through the Beatitudes, we talked the last 2 weeks about salt and light. as he was kind of giving the application, how as those who were exhibiting and took on the characteristics of the Beatitudes, to be a salt and light in the world. We talked about light, that we are to be a light in the world, that we carry the light of Christ in us. I do not carry light on my own. I do not bear light of my own existence. I am a sinner, and I live and walk in darkness as any other sinner. I have no light in me. But on the day that I asked Jesus Christ into my heart, He came into my heart. He promised to do that and to stay there forever. And so His light is in me. And He has called us as to be people and children of light, to go into a dark world where all the other sinners are, who are sinners just like us, to walk into that dark world with the light that is in us and be a light in a dark world. That we are to shine that light. And we talked about how, as he says in the verses, how dumb it would be to have light and to hide it. How dumb would it be to light a candle and then put something on top of it and cover it so that nobody can see the light? How ludicrous that is. If you don't want light, blow the candle out. If you want light, light the candle and hold it up so that it may shine its light on all that are around and all may see. That we are to be a light in the world. That's part of how we serve. We take the love of God into the world and we show that. We were once lost in sin. We were once dark. And Jesus showed us the light. And so now we are bearers of that light to the world. And part of that is that understanding that we need to do that. That is our responsibility, that we put others before ourselves. That their existence is more important than mine. There's an old story I heard. I don't know if it was true or not. Either way, it has a good message. About a man who took his son and his son's friend out fishing, deep sea fishing. They went out in the ocean to fish. And a storm came up and they got caught in it. And both boys were tossed overboard. And the man had quick reaction and he grabbed one life preserver that he had, and he threw it overboard and brought in his son's friend. And his son drowned. And they get back to shore, and they're talking to him and asking about what happened, and they can't believe that he came back with his son's friend and not his son. And he said, my son is a Christian, and I knew where he was spending eternity, but his friend was not. And I could not, even in that moment, even as a father, could not let this boy die knowing where he would spend eternity. My son would be fine, and I pray that he would forgive me. But this young boy needed life. I don't know if that's a true story or not, but it's powerful just the same. To understand that in this world, they need the light. They need us who know what the truth is. They need us who have experienced the love of God to go into the world and to shed that love and that light so that they know what it is. We know the world that is around us. We know the darkness that we live in. We know the pains and the sufferings. And why is all this going on? Because they live and walk in darkness. And we need believers who have that light to put others first, to not worry about my life, but to worry about theirs. What is it that matters to this world in my life? What do I gain from this world that is going to be greater than what I've already gained through Christ? What is it that I will accumulate in this life that is greater than what I will be given the moment I walk into heaven? I can't accumulate enough stuff here to even match what will be handed to me the first day I walk through the pearly gates. And to think that there are others around me who don't have that. That if they were to die, that they would lose everything, including their souls. And that my responsibility needs to be to put others first, to share that light. But you know, we live in what we call a me generation. We live in a me world. Now, we didn't invent that in the 21st century, or the 20th century on into where we live now. It didn't happen in our lifetime. That's been around for a long time. As long as there's been people, there has been me thinking. There's been a me generation, probably for every generation that's ever existed. But we live in a me generation, and what does that mean? It is about me. Me first. Get yours, because nobody else is going to get it for you. You better take whatever you can get, because everybody else is going to take as much as they can get, and you'll be left with nothing. Look out for number one. Who's number one? I am. If you don't, nobody else is going to. And although this commercial is long old and they don't use that phrase anymore, the concept still exists. You remember the old beer commercial says, get all the gusto you can out of life. Get all the gusto you can. Go grab everything that you can from this life. Squeeze out every drop of this life. And as much as that sounds and resonates with people, it is also very sad, because for the same thing I said a while ago, what is it this world can offer you that is in any way a comparison to what God offers and will give you? But when you have no concept of heaven, when you have no concept of light, what is there left for you? You might as well get everything you can get out of this life, because that's all you got. Because when it's over, you lose everything. We live in a me generation, and unfortunately that spills over to believers. Because we are still sinners. Saved by grace, our eternity is secure, but we are still sinners, and we still have problems with self. We still have problems with being a me generation. And so all of us at some time, most of us, probably most of the time, we don't live a selfless life. We live a selfish life. When we do that, when we live a selfish life, we live a life that hides the light. We are covering up our light for our own benefit, for our own warmth, and for our own enjoyment, and we don't share it with the rest of the world. And that is not the example that Jesus is showing you. That's not what he wants us to do. Our world needs light. Who will see it unless we show it? So whom do we show the light? We saw in verse 4 and 5. He poured out the water and he went around and he washed all of their feet, all of the disciples' feet. Let's jump down to verse 26, 27. Same chapter. So Jesus answered, "It is he to whom I will give this morsel of bread when I have dipped it." So when he has dipped the morsel, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. And after he had taken the morsel, Satan entered into him, and Jesus said to him, "What you are going to do, do quickly." Okay? Jesus washed the feet of the disciples, including Judas. Wash the feet up in verse 4 and 5. We'll get down to verse 26 and 27 before Judas leaves the scene to go and betray Jesus. You don't think Jesus knew that? You don't think Jesus was aware of what Judas was going to do? Well, if we're not sure about that, we can find it right here, verse 2. Go all the way back up to verse 2. During supper, when the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. Okay? It's already been done. Okay? If that's not clear enough for you, verse 10. Jesus said to him, this is answering actually to Peter, as a continuation of what we said before. Peter said, "Don't wash my feet. I'm uncomfortable with that." Jesus in verse 7 said, "What I'm doing you do not understand, but afterwards you'll understand." Peter in verse 8 said, "Then you shall never wash my feet." Jesus said, "If I don't wash you, you have no share with me." So Peter goes, "Well, then not just my feet. Wash my head, my hand. Just wash everything then. I want to be all in." And Jesus said to him in verse 10, he said, "The one who is bathed does not need to wash except for his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not every one of you." He already knew. For he knew who was to betray him. Verse 11. For he knew who was to betray him. That was why he said, not all of you are clean. Go down to verse 18. Because in verse 17 it says, if you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. But in verse 18 it says, but I am not speaking of all of you. I know whom I have chosen, but the scripture will be fulfilled. He who ate my bread has lifted his heel against me. And I am telling you this now, before it takes place, that when it does take place, you may believe that I am he. And truly, truly, I say to you, whoever receives the one and I send receives me. Whoever receives me receives the one who has sent me. So he says there, as he finishes there in 19, he's telling everybody, I already know who it is. There's already stuff going on, and I'm aware of it. And I'm telling you this now, so later on you're going to remember these words that I knew beforehand. Jesus knew. So before the upper room, before the Last Supper, before all of this was going on, before he wrapped the towel around his waist and he went around to the 12 disciples, Jesus knew. He knew what? That Judas would betray him. That Judas already had betrayal already in his heart. He'd already made the arrangements. He'd already made the agreement. And yet he sits with the 12. As he always had. And when Jesus went around and he washed feet, the Bible makes no distinction on his service and his being a servant to any of those 12. He washed the feet of Judas just like he washed the feet of Peter. And just as he washed the feet of every other disciple. To whom is this message for? It's for all people. So my point this morning is Jesus knew that. There are no qualifications. We cannot pick and choose to whom the message goes. You know, there are some that would teach that that Jesus died for an elect, that Jesus died for some. And I believe there's a lot of evidence that shows to the contrary, that Jesus lived and died for all men. All women, all people of all times. There's not one person he's ever created that the opportunity for salvation through Christ is not possible. And there are scores of scriptures about this, but to me this is an example of that. If he was going to pick and choose, if there was ever a qualification, if that existed, Judas, you would think, would fall into that. You think we would say, let's have this part about dipping the morsel and who's going to, betray me and all that. Let's take care of that first. And I'll say, hey, go whatever you need to do quickly. And then after he leaves the room, then I will go about my business in washing the feet of the remaining 11 who are loyal to me, who I love and will be with me. But that wasn't what Jesus did. He washed all their feet equally. So do unto others as he has done unto us. We are to live as Christ has shown us to live. We are to treat others as Jesus has treated us. As we have been given grace, we should bestow grace. We used that example a few weeks ago of the servant who has been forgiven the great debt, this fantastic millions of dollar debt by the king, and then went out and had one of his fellow servants thrown in debtor's prison because he owed him, $10,000. Okay, that's not a small sum of money, but he was just forgiven of millions, and he gets mad over 10,000. And then what happened to him when the king found out about that. See, we have been forgiven so much. The distance between heaven and hell might as well be billions and trillions of dollars away, because we can't buy our way up. We can't buy our way back into heaven. It is only through the blood of Jesus Christ that we can do that, and that is the heaviest price of all. Greater than gold and silver and precious jewels, and greater than all the money in the world. because it is something we can't buy. We can accumulate money. Some may do it better than others. But we can accumulate money and accumulate riches. But no person has accumulated enough riches to even have 1% of 1% of 1% of 1%. It really doesn't even matter how far I go with that, because how do you say, it's too infinitesimal. It's too small. It doesn't even register. We've been forgiven that great of a debt. Do we hold the debt between our brothers and sisters and fellow human beings, the debt that is between us, with such distinction? Do we hold the distinction of what the evil that has been done to us by other people, or the lifestyle that we see that we don't like and we don't approve of, and hold it in such distinction that we judge them and withhold from them the light that we have? How do we make that choice? But we do. You know why? Because we start with a life and a heart that is selfish. And once we start with that, then we get to be and determine the level of which judgment is given or reprieved. None of us are righteous enough to be judged. Of the debt that we've been forgiven, we need to forgive the small debt between mankind, between our brothers and sisters, others that God has created just like us. Let's go to verse 12. If there's any doubt of what this meaning is, what Jesus meant by doing this, he says in verse 12, when he had washed their feet and put on his outer garments and resumed his place, he said to them, do you understand what I've done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, that you also should do just as I have done to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. You are my servants. You are not greater than the master. So if the master gets down on his lowest level and does the most menial of tasks, the servant can do no less. The servant has no right to say, I will not go that far. This is the lesson that he gives to his disciples. This is the last lesson, to love and to serve. I loved you when you were not lovable. I loved you when you were lost in darkness. I loved you when you were nothing but sin. And I loved you with everything that I had. And I offered you my salvation. You received it. Look around. There's a world full of the people who are in the same boat you were. And I want to save them as much as I saved you. I want to show them my light as much as I desire to show you. And one of the reasons why I leave you here in this world, full of darkness, full of temptation, full of sin and suffering, pain and agony, heartbreak and loss. Stop me when you realize that I'm a graceful and wonderful, caring God. Why would I do that to you if I love you so much? It's because I need you. I want to use you. You will get your reward, and it will be for an eternity. But for a few years, for a handful of decades, all I ask is for your commitment to go out into the world and be the light. Be my light. Spread the message. Share the love. Share the light. And do whatever you need to let people know that God loves them. Amen. You watch TV, watch History Channel, you watch everywhere, you see people who don't believe God is love. Why would you care about where people pray? Why would you care about where the Ten Commandments are displayed? Why would you care if we use the word Christmas or not? Why would you care about any of those things except you see that and you think it's hatred and not love? Well, you can't see it for what it is and think that. You can't see the light for what it is and believe that. It is people who've been raised up in darkness, who don't know light, and only see it and hear about it from distance, and they have their opinions and thoughts on it because they've not felt its warmth. Because believers are hiding their light behind their selfish hearts and their selfish lives. God says, I need you here. I need you to be my light bearers. I need you to be a witness to the world. To tell them, I once was a sinner. I once was lost in darkness. I once felt loneliness and pain. I know what it's like to feel all of the things you feel inside. And one day I met Jesus face to face. The real one. Not the one other people kind of talk about. Not the one they try to discredit, but the one true God. His Son Jesus. Let me tell you what he did. There was a day he came and he laid his life down on the cross and died for me. And the good news is it wasn't just for me, it was for you too. His blood that he shed covered the price and the debt of all my sin. And when I accept his love and I accept his forgiveness and I receive his payment for my debt, then I am set free. And now I live in the warmth of the light of the love of my God through my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and you can have him too. He will save you. There are no persons that are excluded from that. So this is entrusted into our hands. We are to be servants, not of the world, but we are to be servants to the world. As we go into invitation time, we understand the world that we live in is dark, it's hurting. The world is dirty. You want to know why people act that way? Talk that way? The creativity of sin is almost mind-boggling. How can people be so cruel, so vile, so sinful? Because they live in a dark world. They hurt. It's dirty. It's filthy. Selfish Christians hide their light. I'm convinced that if all the Christians of the world lived the way they should live, as the Beatitudes as Christ gave them, and in the attitude and manner of which he shows and displays here, our world would be turned on its ear. There would be revival around the globe. And governments would be changed, countries would be changed, lives would be changed. And our world would be a much better, brighter place to live. But the reality is, the harvest is ripe, but the laborers are few. We're too worried about our own self. We're too worried about our own life. We're too worried about what we get. Many of us are falling more in that category. It's like, I don't mind helping out, but man, I got to take care of myself first. I got to work. I got to take care of family. I got to do this. I got to do that. I got to do all these things. And when I have energy left over, or time left over, or money left over, I'll give that to help others. I'm a good person. I care. But I have to go through and give all the energy for myself first. What I have left over, I give. See, we even approach God like that, and God's like, that's not good enough. He said, if I'm going to be your God, I need to be your God of all. I need to be the God of your life, not your leftovers. You give to me first. And then with me by your side, I will go through what is the necessary parts of your day to work and all the things that are necessary as parts of life. God understands those things. But you do it under the leadership and guidance of God. Not do it yourself and then give God the leftovers. The same way that we live and serve in this world. We don't just serve when it's convenient or in our leftovers. We go even to the ends of the earth. We go to the point of being the menial servant. We go to the point that we would serve even the undeserving by symbolically washing their feet. I would lower myself under someone who is so undeserving. But it's not about between me and them. It's not about their status and my status. It's about the condition of their heart and the condition of their soul. And I have the light. I'm already rich. So as low as I get in this world, doesn't matter. My coffer's full. And they may think they have it all. They may be given it all by the people in this world, but they have nothing. And I want to help them find everything. Ask God to forgive us. We need to ask God to forgive us of our selfish ways. And then ask God, where can I go to wash feet? This is our invitation. God, where is it in my heart that I am selfish, where I've withheld from you? God, where I need to apologize and ask for forgiveness that I have hidden your light. I haven't, but I've hidden it. The world around me and all the trials and tribulations, all the sufferings that I see, all the things I see on the news that I shake my head at, I can't believe the world that we live in. That's part of my responsibility. God, you didn't ask me to save the world, but you asked me to be a light. Show me where to go. Give me the strength not to hide. Show me where I need to wash feet. It's our invitation. Whatever you need to do, to come at the altar and pray where you are. You want to come pray with me. I say, Jesus, you gave everything. You gave your life. And you served at the lowest level. Help me serve you. To be called as you've asked your disciples to be called. And to serve as they serve. As we stand, we sing. This is your invitation.